and welcome to 2025 and the first Dementia Researcher Salon session of the year. I'm Adam Smith, I'm the Program Director for Dementia Researcher, and it's my pleasure to be hosting this evening session. I say this evening, of course, it's 8 p.m. in the UK, but I'm not sure what time it is where you are. Certainly, it's earlier in the day for our two wonderful speakers this evening, who are both joining us from the US. And this evening, we're going to be talking about researching with underrepresented people. The importance of inclusivity in dementia research cannot be overstated, as it directly impacts the relevance and applicability of findings for diverse populations. And in this salon session, we're going to explore the topic of researching with underrepresented people and engaging to examine the ethical elements of that, the dimensions, methodological challenges, and how we ensure that those voices are represented in research. And by exploring how to effectively integrate these perspectives, we can enhance our understanding of dementia and its varied impacts across our community. I should have pre-read my script before trying to read it, shouldn't I? This session hopes to foster reflection and explore ways that we can overcome some of those challenges and to ensure that research is truly inclusive. My speakers, who are both being a little shy, but I'm hoping they're going to turn their cameras on now. Dr. Bayram is an assistant professor at the Movement Disorders Center at the Department of Neurology at the University of Colorado. That's right. Yeah, I know you moved recently. Her current research is focused on sex and gender, ethnic, racial differences in neurodegenerative Parkinson's diseases. And Edger was recently elected as communications chair. I say recently, it feels like ages ago now, of the iStart Lewy Bodies Dementia Professional Interest Area. From the Alzheimer's Association, is also active in the Lewy Body Dementia Association as the last co-chair for the Outreach and Engagement Working Group. Hi, Edger. Thank you very much for joining us. And we have Karah, Karah Alexander, who recently completed a PhD at Emory University. I said recently again, May 2024. It must feel like ages ago already. Her research explores how health literacy and medical discrimination in Black dementia caregivers. She's also passionate about developing and conducting intervention research with psychoeducation programs that help minimize care provision amongst Black caregivers. Before the transition to postdoc work, Karah is currently gaining experience in administrative side of research. Goodness, why would you want to do that? And working as a clinical research coordinator at the Caregiver Bootcamp program, which aids caregivers in processing their loved one's dementia diagnosis. Important topic, of course, not that the topic's so posh, admin though. Which aids caregivers in processing their loved one's dementia diagnosis and taking initial steps as a caregiver before worked as instructional designer and coordinator with the Rosalind Carter Institute for Caregivers, culturally tailoring their evidence-based dealing with dementia program. Such important topics. You both do incredible work, and we're going to hear from both of you today. For those that don't know or haven't joined us before, the format for this is we invite Edger and Karah to each present for 10 minutes, and then we're going to come back. We're going to I'll ask them questions, we'll have a little conversation, and then we'll hopefully give you all a chance as well to join us in the chat, where you can put your perspectives forwards as well and share your own experiences. Looking at the participants this evening, I know some of you, this is a very important topic for you that you also feel incredibly passionate about. So I'm looking forward to getting your perspectives in there as well. And I will enable the Q&A while Edge is talking so we can get some questions in from you. But that's enough from me. I'm going to invite Edger. You're not using slides, so I'm going to hand over to you and let you speak. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I'm excited. Thanks for having me for the first session of 2025. Happy New Year, everyone. So I thought a lot about how I should do the talk, how I should prep for it, what I should touch on. And the more I thought about it, the more I tried to prepare for it, I just felt there's absolutely no way I can cover everything. I can't even cover my own experience fully. I'm not going to be able to tell you all the barriers, all the problems we face in this specific area of research. There's no way I'm going to touch on all the communities that are underrepresented. So I wanted to start off by sharing my own experience, and it may or may not apply to you, but I'm hoping it at least gets you thinking about what you can do, how you can help support inclusivity, diversity in our field. So I'm Turkish, born and raised. I'm a woman, cisgender, but I do identify as a member of the LGBTQ plus community. And I didn't used to be a minoritized group in Turkey because I'm Turkish, but I moved to the States and I moved here with a visa, so I'm not even at an immigrant status. And I basically made myself minoritized in this country because I'm not from here. I don't fit in any of the bigger ethnicity or racial groups. So a lot of the findings here don't apply to me. And when I was doing research in Turkey, a lot of the findings I was submitting to papers, they kept telling me this doesn't apply to the majority. And I felt, what is the majority? US isn't the majority. Even the studies coming out of US doesn't fully cover the communities in the US. So I always struggled with that. And I never thought of myself as a minority person, but I am one. And the fact that it's not just one dimension, it's intersecting identities that make us who we are is important too. I am a majority in certain aspects, but a minority in other aspects. And based on how you're looking at things, you may identify me differently. I may identify myself differently. And the fact is, right now, majority of the research findings that we have in the literature, they don't apply to me. They don't apply to my family, to my parents, to my grandparents. My grandma didn't know how to read. She passed away. So a lot of the research absolutely had nothing to do with her. She couldn't even participate in research because she can't fill those scales. She can't read the consent form, and no one took the time to actually go over consent forms with her. So during my dissertation, as I was designing my study to work on language impairments in Parkinson's disease, I realized how the scales that were developed in Europe, North America, they were very hard to implement in Turkey. Majority of the people I saw were illiterate or they had lower years of education, so those scales were very tough for them to fill out, for me to administer to them. So I had to figure out new ways to actually get them involved in research. We didn't have any problems with including people in our research studies because people were willing once you give them the chance. They were very willing. They were very eager. Once you explain the study to them, they loved being a part of it. We didn't have an issue there. But the design was an issue. Coming up with the scales that are fitting for them, and then giving them the results afterwards because they all felt like, okay, we spent 4 hours with you doing these tests, you torturing us with these tests. Now what does this all mean? So I went back and told them, hey, this is what I found. And I didn't just give them the publication because I know it's not going to mean anything to them. It's just a fancy written statement with a bunch of terminology that they're not used to. So, I had to figure out how to work with the people that raised me during my research at that time. And after I moved to the States, I realized that disparities are really deep, especially in this country. The segregation between the communities when it comes to research is pretty striking in the US. And something common that I get from people is, how do you communicate? How do you communicate the research findings? How do you communicate the research studies? And I always felt like, don't you communicate in your daily life? You can't be just surrounded by, professionals at all times. Don't you talk to your grandparents like I do, who don't know how to read, and you explain to them what you do at your work, and you explain it to them in a way that they understand. And once they understand, they're not dumb. You know, they are eager to learn. They want to learn. So there's a lot of opportunities. So that was something that really surprised me in this country, that lack of proper communication and, I don't know, just acting as if you're not a part of the community, I guess, because we know how to communicate when we're out on the streets. I mean, I communicate with cisgender straight people just fine. I don't have a different language just because I'm from the LGBTQ plus community, or I communicate with people who don't know how to read just fine. It doesn't change that I know how to read. My communication doesn't change. So I think this feels like an odd thing to me. Um, Underrepresented should not have been a thing because they're the community, they're what your research is for. I really like that saying, inclusivity isn't charity, it's justice. And I do feel like if you're not getting research findings that are applicable to all, what good is your research finding? You know, you want something to apply to the clinic, you want something to be used at the clinic, and you need it to represent the people that you see at the clinic. It sucks to see someone with dementia, any neurological disorder, who has gone through certain disparities in their life, and you have to tell them, hey, I have no idea how your progression is going to look. I have no clue how the treatment is going to affect you. It sucks. It's terrible. You have to know what you're going to tell to these people. It's unfair. It's unfair to go to someone and say, hey, I know how the disease is going to work for you. This is what next couple years are going to look like. This is the treatment that will work or not work for you. And then you see other people and you're like, I have no idea about you. So I never want to be in that position. Maybe that's why I don't do clinic anymore. I'm full research. I stopped clinic a while ago. But that is kind of what drives me. I want research findings that I can take to my grandparents and say, hey, I found out this. It means this for you. It means this for us. And I want to be able to share that with everyone, because you don't get research findings from a certain group that is just going to impact them. You actually get that finding and you put it into other groups too, it may impact them as well. If you find a research finding in the LGBTQ plus community, if you find them, hey, they have a higher risk for Alzheimer's, and you look into why that higher risk occurs and you say, oh, it's because of the minority stress, it's because of the discrimination you're putting them through life, then that means, hey, discrimination is causing people to get dementia, so let's address the discrimination. So people outside of LGBTQ plus community aren't going through that hurdle either. I'm rambling, sorry. But I also want to put it out. I think Karah's going to be better at saying all this than me, but I do want to put it out. Sometimes you feel weak. You feel like, oh, shoot, like I can't really address these things. There are disparities everywhere. What can I do? You know, especially when it comes to science and you're maybe not at a powerful stage. You may feel like, okay, there's nothing I can do. There's nothing I can change. It starts with small things, like something I experienced publishing from Turkey. I would submit a paper and the reviewer would say, you have to specify that it comes from Turkey, put it in the title even that it's from Turkey, the participants are Turkish, and that it's not applicable to all. And I felt, I don't see this in the studies in the US or Europe though. Like, why am I doing this with a study in Turkey? Why are those applicable to everyone, but Turkey isn't applicable to all? And that had to do with the reviewers. So if you're in a reviewer position, you're going over an article and you feel like a study coming from Turkey Thailand, Nigeria is not applicable to all, but then you review a study coming from US, Canada, Europe, and you don't really feel that. You don't really wonder if that's applicable. That's the first thing you got to change. That's the beginning of your impact. That's how you can start making an impact when you're reviewing the paper and you can realize, okay, this is not the right mindset. If you feel like one country is applicable to the whole world and one country isn't, start by changing that in your review process. And that's such a small thing. Once you publish a paper, you're going to get flooded with requests to review a paper. So you're going to play a role in that. When you're designing a study, keep the communities in your local area in mind, especially if you're going to recruit from your local area. If you have a population that identifies as Hispanic way more, or if you're trying to target that population and get them into studies, you have to be mindful of them having comorbidities, other accompanying diseases that you put in your exclusion criteria. If you put certain diseases in your exclusion criteria with no reason, but hey, this is what I keep seeing in the literature, so I should go ahead with it, then you're excluding those communities who have a higher risk of having those health problems. If you're putting care partner is mandatory in your study, then you're excluding a lot of people who may not have care partners, who may not be living with someone. And we do see, for instance, in the LGBTQ plus community, they're less likely to have care partners. So by default, you're excluding them. So you have to be mindful of your local community whenever you're designing the studies. When you're putting together the outcomes, you have to be mindful of, the population that you're going to use that outcome measure for. If you have a big community of people who are illiterate, then you may have to design your study accordingly. If you're trying to reach people who don't have high education, then you have to pick your scales, mindfully. And policies definitely play a role, and you may not have power over it. When Adam mentioned, I recently moved to Colorado. I recently got this job, and something very important for me was making sure that the place I'm going to had decent laws for women and LGBTQ plus people, because I am one. In case I have to go through abortion, I want to be somewhere where I'm safe. I work on women and LGBTQ plus experiences, and I want participants to feel safe disclosing their identity to me. I don't want them to be at risk for horrible, terrible things. So policies definitely play a role, and as citizens, wherever you are, you can make changes in those policies. You can push for changes in those policies. Sure, your power may be limited, but you have a power every time you vote. Keep those in mind. And also, the disparities we see in research go way beyond health disparities. We know that social factors play a role in dementia risk and many other diseases too. And those social factors really differ a lot across the communities. People from minoritized groups usually have a higher risk of experiencing education disparities, access to care, and going through life at worse conditions. So you have to be mindful of those. And, if you go through a life where you're constantly discriminated against, where you're treated lower, then you can't expect that person to say, oh, you're doing research? Cool, I'll be a part of it. You have to go the extra mile. You can't just open the door and say, hey, we're inclusive. You actually have to get out of your seats, go through that door, find the people, hold them, and walk them through the door with you. And once you walk them through the door with you, you can't just leave them there either. It has to be a relationship that you're going to keep maintaining. You can't just abandon people. You got to build trust, and you have to maintain that trust so that connection will lead to more and more connections that is going to improve your research and also improve the outcomes for them. something that I really valued as an advice for disparities research was try to remember that you're not a savior, you're not saving them, you're not changing their lives by getting them into research. You're, improving your research and improving the outcomes for them, but this is your job. This is not like a wonderful saviorship that you're providing to them. They can survive without you too. If someone else does your job for them, they can benefit from them too. You may be doing amazing things, but try to remember who you're doing it for, what you're doing it for, why it matters, without getting that ego of like, oh, I'm saving people. I'm the best. I'm so much better than them. No. If you go through a lifetime of being minoritized, being discriminated against, not having the opportunities you had, you may have had a very different outcome in your life too. So, keeping those in mind, remembering that you're part of those communities as well. No one is, I doubt, could be like a completely majority in all the aspects of life. So I'm sure there are some, minoritized group identities that you fall under too. And I feel that way when I go to the doctor's office when someone asks me about my sexual orientation, gender identity. I'm always like, why are you asking? Why does this matter? Why do you want to know? When someone wants to learn about my religious preference, I'm like, why? What is this about? You can get that information by providing them the reasons, but don't take it lightly. Provide them a safe space and think about the community. Think about the community you're in. I feel like I just rambled and rambled. I do hope, it gave you some stuff to think about with your own community, because that's my mindset that I wanted to share with you. And I'll leave it up to give a much more structured, better insights.
That was really good. Thank you, Edja. And you pick up on some really important points, which I'd kind of forgotten about in my own work. I remember one of the very first meetings I had when I joined the NIHR, and there was a question raised about. So one of the very first projects I worked on was that there was very little research involving care home residents. Care homes were in the news quite a lot at the time because there'd been lots of scandal about how care was provided, whether it was very good quality. And then when we started to look through the eligibility criteria for most studies, being a resident in a care home was an immediate exclusion criteria. I was like, why? And I remember talking to a very senior researcher at the time who just said, well, it's harder. And you go, so, and then we went down the kind of list of, English not being your first language, as you pointed out, not having a care partner, and even then putting criteria on who that care partner could be. It couldn't be like a friend or a significant other. It had to be somebody who was living with them. They couldn't, and there were so many, which reminds me that when we're talking about this issue, there's so many things to get better at. There's not only designing more research from the outset, which is based around those people which are underrepresented in research, but also getting better at including minoritized groups in mainstream, I'd say mainstream, but in the kind of larger studies, which are all too often just aimed at people who participate in research, white middle class people. Certainly that's in the UK. I imagine it's in the they're the people who participate in research in the UK. And I don't know, did you feel that we've improved? I can't help but think now that in the conferences I went to 7-8 years ago, there'd always be this slide at the end that said, there wouldn't be any acknowledgement at all. They wouldn't have even broken down the ethnicity of participants or anything. They'd have just said, these are the participants. And then in the last few years, there's a slide at the end that says, we acknowledge that there weren't enough underrepresented people in this study. are we now getting one step beyond that to actually not just say we're sorry we didn't make an effort, but we are actually making an effort now?
I think that's the power of funding agencies and the reviewers that they have over these studies, because they started bringing those mandatory requirements, like NIH study requires the ethnicity, race to be reported, sex and gender to be reported. So those requirements make people collect that data. I think otherwise, it would still be unnoticed. And there are at times funding agencies saying that you have to recruit this percentage of people who are from certain minoritized groups. And those are the reasons why people are kind of pushing more. There was an interesting comparison between two clinical trials in Parkinson's disease where they both had the same budget, same outreach resources. One of them had the NIH mandation that they had to recruit this percentage of Hispanics to be able to wrap up the study. Otherwise, everything was the same. It was done at the same centers. And the one that had that requirement was the one that recruited more Hispanics because they wanted to finish the study, so they were putting in more and more effort. I do understand that it's more legwork to reach the minoritized groups because you're battling, centuries of mistrust, abuse, and you're going to them saying like, "Hey, I have this research," and they're like, "We saw that, we got abuse afterwards." And they carry on those scars, those stories with them. So you have to battle those. I think a lot of people are really putting in the efforts. They're eager to do the legwork, but they need the support. It's not something you do on top of your job. It has to be within your job. It's not like, oh, you got to recruit more people who have disabilities. Do it on the weekends. Go to the care homes, rehabilitation centers on the weekend. And you're like, that's not going to happen. It's tough because you have your whole life too. It's not, you're not just defined by your job. It's tough. But if you actually include it within the job description, you actually pay people for their effort, then sure, they're going to be more likely to help. I mean, we have, for the Hispanic communities in the US, we have promotoras where you actually pay them for their efforts, and they go out in the community and they speak Spanish and they engage with the communities because they're a part of those Hispanic communities themselves, and they help recruit research participants, and it's been proven to be very helpful. And a lot of centers are kind of getting the hints like, oh, okay, these resources out there, they help, so let's use them. But you got to spare the funds for that. So
I think you need to build that in, don't you, from the study design, from the outset. I mean, of course, that starts with patient and public involvement in making sure that those people are represented in study design in the first place, but then persuading those funders that if you want this better representation, that there does need to be, it's going to take longer. It's going to cost a little bit more money. We're going to have to add additional sites to this. You can't just do this in one part of the city. You're going to have to go to other parts of the city or other parts of the country potentially. And I suppose at the moment we seem to be focused on, particularly on gender. I think even in fundamental science, there's an acknowledgement now that we only use male mice, right? And we're getting better at gender and ethnicity have obviously been a focus point for this, but there are so many other underrepresented people in there. I mean, I'm thinking about, as you said, like not working in the UK, certainly working class people from poorer parts of the community. And research, the same studies that we do in the US being done in other parts of the world, right? I mean, that study should be done in sub-Saharan Africa, where we know that dementia prevalence is set to have the biggest increases, not just in, North America or in Europe. Even this is wonderful. We're going to pick this back up afterwards, but Karah's been very patient, so I'm going to go to Karah now. Do you want to try and share your screen? Do we think this is going to work?
No, I think I'm just gonna.
Okay. Over to you. Please be patient. Anybody who asks questions, please do put them in the chat. We will get to them after Karah's talk.
And that was such a great segue. It was really great that Dr. Cho went first. I think that what I have to say complements as well as overlaps a little bit. So as mentioned in the bio, my primary population focuses with African-American families affected by dementia, with heavy emphasis on caregivers. Now I operate out of a lab, Faith Village Research Lab. We've been going since my master's 2017. And it's, well, our primary mission is to help combat dementia-related disparities among Black families using education and research. And as many of us know, African Americans are an underrepresented population in dementia research through multiple avenues. And within our lab, we have numerous projects that go on. We educate. And another major service or point of reference that we have within our lab, a lot of researchers come to us and say, how do we get increased participation within this group? And that was really, I didn't have too many slides, but I was just going to break down 4 key pillars that aren't published or aren't, scientific. Some you might find overlap in different articles, but these are just 4 points that have helped us be able to serve hundreds and hundreds of families across the United States and increasing. First and foremost, underrepresented in research 9 times out of 10 does not equal hard to reach. That term makes me cringe just because often, and this is coming from the populations themselves, it's not because they're hard to reach or vulnerable. It's because oftentimes researchers don't know how. They don't understand the legwork or the work that it often takes. Sometimes it's limited feasibility, mistrust, as we spoke on, where people are hesitant to participate and things like that. That's what, what would make one think, oh, they are a hard, to reach group. And so when people come to us and they say, how do we, increase participation? And I'm speaking solely on African Americans because that's the population of which I work with. These 4 points most likely will apply to other groups, but again, I'm only speaking in terms of African Americans because that's who I have the most experience working with. The first and the foremost is knowing and affirming the why. Why? Why? And obviously diversity. We want to diversify. We want to apply to general population and want to include. But it has to be more than that, particularly when you're working with African Americans who are very hesitant about working with healthcare researchers. And oftentimes funders will put out these calls and it's heavy on disparities. It's heavy about including underrepresented groups and things like that. And people will rush and they'll, put in the proposal, LOI, because they need the funding or because they, they see this as previously mentioned, this savior complex, but the intent is not there. The course of action to reach the population that this call has encouraged people to include is not there. And when you don't have that why and a clear why and are able to communicate it to where that you would be helping not only yourself, but the population and want to maintain that, everything else, it's just not as good of quality of work. And we know because we have seen it. And so that kind of goes into the next point, which is researching and scoping out if there are other organizations or other groups that are already doing this work, which is why people come to us, because they see our success rate with this population of interest that they want to increase in their study. And now it becomes a collaboration, right? Because now we are helping them and in turn they're helping us. So for example, we had a Hispanic researcher who was doing an intervention with dementia caregivers, and she wanted to increase. She was struggling with African American participation, and she didn't have, the best sources of, how to reach the population. And so she was a colleague of one of our lab advisors. She said, she explained her study and whatnot, and she knew at the same time that we were just finishing up a project where it was mostly done in person with groups of caregivers. And she said, I know that you're doing this in person. Let us use some of this funding to pay for all of the caregivers' meals throughout the duration of the study, permitted that you all hand out our flyers, and I or another representation on my team can give a spiel about, the work. And so they vetted it to us to make sure, because again, and I'll talk more about this at the end, the trust that we have already maintained with our caregiver communities, we had to make sure that this was something that was feasible for them, that would actually benefit them, and that we felt comfortable saying, okay, this is a good resource. Because at the end of the day, our names are tied to a lot of researchers or working groups that are coming in and wanting to work with the caregivers, because we are, encouraging them and we're vetting for them. And so it worked out really, really nicely. And she was able to increase her numbers for study, which was really great. The third thing is relatability. Right. So I'm sure many of us have heard of the term reflexivity. It's very important to practice, and it's very important not just to reflect on, but to actually put into practice. So not all of us, but many of us on the team are African American, which helps, right? Because they see somebody that they identify with. And so you got their ears, right? You got their attention, but it's still not enough. It's still not enough. We're still researchers. We're still very well educated. Most of us are not caregivers. Some of us have never been caregivers, and age. So although our age range of the caregivers that we are serving has expanded, it's still mostly older adults that we're working with. And so sometimes there can be a little bit of a disconnect. So what do? Well, we have two community advisory boards, paid community advisory board. And the one that I work most closely with, because I do the psychoeducation intervention work, we've been working with that group of 10 for about 2 years now. We meet quarterly. They get so excited. We do not put out a proposal. We do not put out any publications without going to them first. And this is a group of 10, some of which have been previous participants, others have not. These are community members. These are dementia caregivers. We have one who lives with dementia, one educator, just a very diverse group within a homogeneous ethnic population that serve on this advisory board. And it's very important for us to get their feedback and to get their input, because they are representations. They are the closest representations of the communities of which we're working with. And not only do they help us with our work, but they help us point to people, because to break through that hesitancy, one of the things is word of mouth. Which is something that we rely very heavily on, and which is in the literature in terms of African Americans and the resources that they do gravitate towards. Typically, they're getting it from word of mouth. They hear somebody else talking about it and hearing that positive experience, and now they want to join into that experience. And so the Community Advisory Board does a really great job of helping us out with that. And we make it like a family. So it's a how do I want to say this? It's you have to balance, right? Because as a fellow panelist had said, it's not, at the end of the day, this is research, and you're not like 100%, totally, it's not your life. But with a group that is so hesitant, you have to make yourself a little bit more available. So I know for one project that I was leading, email was not the point of contact. They wanted to talk to somebody on the phone. So I had to give my cell phone number. And that meant sometimes I would get calls on the weekend, sometimes get calls during the week. Sometimes we get invited to different events over the weekend, and we go. And this kind of goes into my last point, which is centering the population throughout each stage of the research process. Kind of like CBPR, community-based participatory research, right? So from the time that we start our study, right, running that through the advisory board, which is helping us give perspective, logical sense of what it is that we want to do, right? They're like, well, are you paying them? Because time is money. And are you paying them well? Right. And so sometimes we have to show a little bit more for honorariums, right? Not as to, persuade them in an ethical way, but to really make them understand that, hey, we know that you are a caregiver, that your time is already very precious. And so what are you going to do, to help me help you, right? Sometimes we're doing stuff in person, right? What does transportation look like? We have to lay out a whole logistical plan, right? To make it so that we're filling in those gaps, so that, that hesitancy that they might have once had, it's starting to decrease little bit by little because they see that this is something that's feasible for them. Let's see what else. If it's online, right? Bandwidth, or maybe we need to, if they're in a rural part, how can we make sure that they're getting, being able to be at those data collection appointments? What are the times of those data collection appointments? So our data collection is, it's a wide range. It's not just a 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. It's early in the morning. It's in the evening. It's on the weekends. It's on Sunday at church afterwards, right? We have to meet them where they are, because that's just the reality, and we don't want them to feel any kind of like, well, I can't do it because of X, Y, and Z. And then once they're involved, right? Resources. That's another huge thing that we offer, because a lot of them see this opportunity to participate as a ability to get resources, more knowledge for them. And so we have a team of students that their work study job is to maintain our resource packets. So that way, if somebody is in this area, whether you're in Atlanta, Georgia, whether you're in California, I need help with this, I need respite, area agencies on aging, you name it, we're able to point them into that direction. It shouldn't just be, oh, that's out of our hands. We're just, researchers. We're just here to collect the data. No, we've created a community. We've created I don't want to say a family, but in a way it is a family. They feel like family because they feel our genuine interest in them. And then comes the end, right? For every study that we do, we have, again, our students create a graphic, infographic that talks through the research, and so that they feel some sense of accomplishment, like, oh wow, okay, so this was really something, I did this. And then comes the question of, now what? Many of them are like, okay, so I participated, now what? So then within our research folder, we have other studies that we vetted for, or we know personally the investigators that we say, hey, this is a good opportunity, this might be a good opportunity for you, this might be a good opportunity for you. And we either tell them at the end of their study participation, or we have a quarterly newsletter that goes out to a listserv of close to 1,000 Black caregivers or Black families impacted by dementia in some kind of way, and send that out. And most of them are online because we're sending it throughout the US, and it's a little bit more difficult to quarterly switch it up based off of the region. But we do give out at least like contact information as that, research or whatever might be in their area. So that's what we do. It's a lot of legwork. It's a lot of work. I'm not even going to sugarcoat it. It is a lot of work, but it is very rewarding. And we're seeing the results. We're getting the positive feedback. We're increasing our numbers because people are like, wow, I got to go tell my cousin. I got to go tell my friend. I got to go tell my church member, whoever, because this is really great. And because we see the numbers increasing of, dementia caregivers within the Black community, people are starting to, look, what's next? What do we do? And so, obviously we have an education piece, because it's not just about the research. We have to educate. And we have to make sure that people understand the value of brain health, which is something else that they appreciate. So that is my spiel. Again, I can't stress it enough. It is a lot of legwork, rewarding work, but legwork at the end of the day. Because in order to make that underrepresented group more represented, you have to do the work. So,
absolutely right. Well said. I mean, I completely agree with everything you've said. I think it's important, and it takes work to do that. And it's kind of funny, because I think we come back to this issue often. We did a salon session quite a few months ago now on study recruitment, where this issue came up again, and people were asking for advice. And everything you've said in there, you've answered so many of my questions, because it's being a part of the communities. And once you bring people in, we had some stats. I set up a thing called Join Dementia Research in the UK, like a recruitment register. And when we broke down, we published a paper on this, Alzheimer's dementia. It's still out if you want to read it. To show that the average number of studies somebody participated in was like 3. And it's because once you got them into the first, they very rarely then said, okay, I've done my bit. They would go on to participate in so many other things. Have you found any other innovative approaches? You talked about your email. In this technological age, are there other ways to reach, or are we saying that the real key to this is it's going back to analog? It's that face-to-face telephone, newsletters through post boxes even. It's not, or are there technologies that we can call upon, do you think?
No, sometimes we travel. So we go in person and we visit with people. Like I had mentioned, sometimes they invite us to different events, not even as researchers, but just kind of casual, which in turn helps our research, because we're able to talk about it, casually. And sometimes we're mailing things, like we're mailing packets, a little bit more traditional, particularly for our rural caregivers. We don't really use technology with them.
Exactly. I completely agree. It's kind of taken a step back. I think so much of study recruitment has moved on to registers and emails and social media and relying upon new technologies. But you just can't beat, I think, for these particular groups, putting the work in, going and talking to community groups, going to the church, physical printed materials, which you send through the post to people, at telephone calls, have really made a comeback. What do you think, Edja?
I was going to add, especially for certain groups, sometimes give an option to remain anonymous in their research responses, surveys, etc. really helps too. Because if you're undocumented, if you're from a minoritized group that often gets discriminated against, it's tough to report those identities, because you fear it's going to put you at risk for certain things, even if the researcher can absolutely guarantee, like, no, this data is not going out, privacy, like, you're safe. But sometimes giving them the option, like, you can remain anonymous, we're not going to collect identifiable information, that really helps too. Having options for data collections, like remote collection, giving them, at times, if it's things they can fill out at home, things they can fill out via phone, on their computer at their own time, giving them the option for those really helps as well. We've been seeing for instance, for genetic data collection, we've been seeing that doing it remotely has been helpful. You can show them how to take a cheek swab, and people are more comfortable doing it remotely. And especially, a lot of people can't travel to you, and you may not be able to travel to everyone. So, giving those remote options so people can still get engaged with research really helps you be more inclusive in your research too.
Are there what are the hard-nosed, beyond this being of clearly the right thing to do, but if the funder that's funding your research isn't asking you to do this, and you are on the fence, you just want to deliver your research, there are other benefits to doing this, right? Why should you go out of your way to include underrepresented, whether that's people from the LGBTQ plus community or people from different genders, ethnicities, or in certain parts of the world that are underrepresented? Why? What are the reasons? I'm hoping you're going to talk about translation and things. I'm leading you down a path. I'm guessing, Karen, you've your research, you just wouldn't work in some places, right? Otherwise, whatever you've used, like, applicable everywhere. But I mean, the things you're discovering, if you hadn't done that, there are the interventions and the things you're learning are very unique that need to be learned. Otherwise, the support you're providing just wouldn't work if you took something off the shelf and tried to put it into a population of people. Am I right in thinking that? Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely agree.
So
I think I was trained as a clinician first, so whenever I do my research now, what I think about is like, okay, how does this translate to the clinic? Is this going to be helpful for the clinic? And even if you're in like a very small community and you see certain types of people, you may get someone outside of your community wandering off to your clinic as well, and you need to be able to provide them answers, you need to be able to provide them support, and for that you need findings that are applicable to a more wide range communities. You need findings that you can translate into the clinic better. And, that is kind of what drives me. It's not that I'm not doing science for the sake of doing science. For me, I do science for the people, for the benefit of the people. So I want my findings to be able to help be used at the clinic to benefit the people. And that is what drives me. But I also want to say, at times, not everyone goes into specific topics, disparities research for the same reasons. Sometimes people hop on the train because it's a popular theme and they feel like, oh, this available so I can get funding. That doesn't necessarily mean it's bad. Like, oh, we only need genuine people in this fields. It doesn't necessarily mean that. I think if people are willing to do the legwork and they're actually putting in the efforts to push the field forwards, then by all means, all are welcome.
I completely agree with that, because I think, when quite often passion drives research, right? And so when you've come from a community of people, whether that's, as a gay man living in a, living your life, or whether it's as a, growing up as a minority in another part of the world from where you tend to be drawn towards researching the things that you know and the things that you see around you. I think there is some benefit to, and whether putting out specific funding calls and things to bring more people to that research. It shouldn't just be that only gay people research gay dementia, living with dementia issues. It should be that everybody brings their knowledge to that. And I think if funders can do that, it's good. But that isn't to say that then they shouldn't bring in representation to make sure that they understand the issues that they clearly just won't understand. I completely agree. Although, do you think that is that harder to do? I mean, do you find, Karen, is it easier to do the research you're doing because you know the community of people. You can relate to the community of people that you're working with more so than I could, for example, English guy.
No, not necessarily. Just because I'm not a caregiver. My grandmother passed from complications with dementia, but I was young, and that was my mom, my aunt's experience. That wasn't mine. So there's things I've had to really learn where there's researchers who might not look like me, but they're very deep into that work. And that's what makes for, such collaborations. I think that it shouldn't be, a race for funding, or it's not a competition. If our genuine goal is to improve the outcomes, then let's collaborate. Bring your expertise, I'll bring mine, and we can make for a beautiful project.
Absolutely, team science. That's what it's all about, isn't it? I'm conscious that where our hour is up, and do you know what? I never got anywhere near my questions, but I've got stuff in here about intersectionality, and we're not going to get to that. But I would. What we are going to do is, even though we're over time, we will jump in the chat for 5 minutes just to hear any perspectives from any audience members that are still with us. Just we'd love you to share your experiences, your thoughts on this topic as well.